Hey class, it's me again. Sorry I couldn't make it. I know it's been gone for a couple days. However, I'm here with my voice. And you guys are going to rock this lesson out. So check it out. The question that's up on this screen is this. How can knowing where a person lives provide information about the person? Again, how can knowing where a person lives provide information about the person? Think about that for a moment. Okay, let's be general here. All right, if a person lives in Japan, then they probably are of what ethnicity? Japanese. Now that's not everybody. This is a general statement. It's kind of very blanketed over. But if I were to tell you that I was from Beverly Hills, are there certain things that you might be able to know about me? Maybe, maybe not. And if I were to say I'm from Compton, could you know a little bit about me? Maybe, maybe not. What about if I said East LA? Maybe, maybe not. However, if you know where a person lives, what information might that tell you about the person? Interesting. 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 Well, here's the thing. In nature, and animals, and different organisms, we can tell a lot by the place in which an organism, like a plant or an animal, lives. Let's talk about that. There are factors that affect and influence ecosystems. One type of factor is called biotic factors. Everyone say that with me? Biotic factors. Yes. These are biological influences on organisms within ecosystems. And this includes all the living things that an organism might interact with. So for a dog, a biotic factor might be a cat. It might be the humans that own the dog. Everything that living that affects the dog, we call biotic factors. Now, things that are not living are called abiotic factors. Everyone say that with me. Abiotic factors. Now, these are physical or non-living factors that shape ecosystems. It might be the temperature. It might be the amount of rain that falls, or the amount of humidity, wind, how much nutrients are available, the soil type, if there's a lot of sunlight, if there's no sunlight. These are all non-living factors, and they indeed affect the ecosystem. Well, how? How do they influence an ecosystem? Well, biotic and abiotic factors determine the survival and growth of an organism and the productivity of the ecosystem in which the organism lives. Say what? Yeah, the biotic and abiotic factors can determine the survival and growth of an organism. If an organism needs water, are they going to live in the desert? Probably not. Probably not. And if an organism, a plant, or an animal needs a lot of sunlight, are they going to survive or be very productive in a place that's very dark? A place that doesn't have a lot of sunlight? Maybe it's very cloudy? Probably not. So these abiotic and biotic factors definitely determine how an organism survives, whether they grow, and their productivity. And that, where they live, is called the habitat. A habitat and niche. What are the difference between the two? Well, habitat is like the address, where they live. Their niche is like what they do, their job, so to say, how they use the habitat to live. So let's talk about this. The habitat is the area in which an organism lives, and it can include both abiotic and biotic factors. The niche, however, it includes a full range of physical and biological conditions in which an organism lives and the way in which the organism uses those conditions. So the habitat, it might be like in a tree, or it might be in a cave, or wherever it might be. The niche might include whether or not they eat certain things, or whether or not certain things eat them. So that would be its place in the food web. The types of food it eats. Who eats the organism? What about the physical conditions it needs to survive? Like the example I said. Perhaps a plant needs a lot of water. And so that would be part of its niche. The required physical conditions to survive. The range of temperatures that organism needs to survive. And when and how it produces. Now, let's take a look at Kermit. Here's Kermit the Frog. Kermit the Frog's right there. And his habitat? Yes, he is in its habitat. And what would be the niche? Well, some of the questions to think about are this. What does the frog eat? Anybody raise their hands? Go ahead and call somebody. All right. Not sure if you said this, but if you said something like insects or worms or spiders or along those lines, you're correct. All right. Now, what eats the frog? Anybody have an answer? Show hands. Anybody? Well, if you were able to answer this question, you might have said something like a heron or a snake or perhaps a raccoon. That's part of its niche. Now, what does it need? What kind of physical conditions does it need to survive? It needs things like, well, as in the picture, you can see water. Then, what about the temperature? What is the temperature it needs to survive? Maybe the pond water is cool. Maybe it needs other things like mud to hibernate. And reproduction? Well, it lays eggs. In what kind of water? Or what kind of months? In the warm months. So that all those things that we just mentioned, where it is in the food chain, what it eats, what it needs to survive, water, land, whatever it is, those are the niche. The habitat is simply where it lives. So let's talk about this picture right here. The bird. Its habitat, is a tree. Well, what about its niche? Where is its place in the food web? In other words, what does it eat and what eats it? Let's call on somebody right now. Anybody have any answers? All right. So it eats what? Worms. Other bigger birds might eat the bird or other animals. So those are its predators. What about this question? What physical conditions does it need to survive? And when and how does it reproduce? You see, these questions are all a part of the niche for the bird. It needs a tree. It needs a nest. It needs all these different things. And when and how does it reproduce? Well, it lays eggs. Lays eggs in its nest. That's how it reproduces. That's part of the niche. So everything that the bird does or things it needs to survive, that's its niche. Habitat is where it is. Now let's talk about the interactions within communities. How might some of these interact with each other? Now, let's talk about the grass and the deer. So some might eat each other, right? There's other organisms like the bear, and there's a stream behind it, probably wants to just eat the fish. Now there's other interactions. You see, organisms interact with each other in a community very differently. Let's talk about them. They include competition. They might compete for either food or a place to live. Predation. They might just eat other organisms. Then there's things like symbiosis, which includes mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. What are these things? Let's talk about them right now. Competition. Competition occurs when organisms of the same or different species attempt to use an ecological resource in the same place at the same time. So what is an ecological resource? It might be the necessity of any necessity of life, like water, nutrients, light, food, or space. Whenever two or maybe different species, two of the same or different species, whenever they are fighting for water, food, for light, or for space, well, that's competition. Direct competition in nature often results in a winner and a loser. And the losing organism usually fails to survive. There's something called the competition exclusion principle, and that states that no two species can occupy the same niche in the same habitat at the same time. Why? It's because one's going to win and one's going to lose. And so therefore, one is going to be excluded. Why? Because of competition. Therefore, the principle. Competitive exclusion principle. Let's take a look at this next slide. Here we have three different birds: the Cape May warbler, the bay-breasted warbler, and the yellow-rumped warbler. It's funny because I actually saw the yellow-rumped warbler down by LMU the other weekend when I went bird watching. Now, the distribution of these warblers avoids direct competition because each species feeds in a different part of the tree. And therefore, they do not have any competition. Take a look at the top. The Cape May warbler only wants to live in the top part of the tree. So it's not going to fight for the middle or the lower part. Same thing for the bay-breasted warbler. It's going to occupy the middle part of the tree because it doesn't want the top or the bottom. The yellow-rumped warbler, however, does want the bottom. And so are they going to fight for different parts of this tree? No. They're going to live in harmony. So why can all these three species of warblers live in the same spruce tree? Well, each of these species has a different niche in its spruce tree habitat. Oh, yes, each of these warblers, they have a different niche in its spruce tree habitat. They need different things. By feeding in different areas of the tree, the birds avoid these, what we call competition with one another. So that's competition. Let's talk about predation. Predation is an interaction in which one organism captures and feeds on another organism, and usually it results in the killing and eating. The one who kills, the one who eats is called the predator, and the one who is the food is the prey. This is the predator and prey. Predation.